So I want to comment and analyze the recent peace treaty between the U.S. Well, it was really the UAE and Israel, with the U.S. brokering it. And I'm going to gauge a few of the reactions. So if you want to talk about the mainstream American geopolitical reaction, it is largely positive, because what rational person would oppose a peace treaty between two countries? The answer to that is that people who call themselves anti-war, or call themselves peace activists, or call themselves non-interventionists often do say things like that without regard to the fact that if you're anti-war, then why would you oppose any sort of peace treaty? Well, the way that they look at it is that it cements, for one of two things. It cements an alliance against Iran and possibly against Syria, as well as stabbing the back of the Palestinians. And if you know who Syrian Girl is, she's this she's appeared on InfoWars in the past. I don't know if she still does, because I haven't really watched InfoWars in a little bit of a while. Just not a lot of time for that, sorry. But the fact is that she is probably one of the most anti-interventionist people in terms of the war in Syria, but she does have a lot of ridiculous opinions. And one of them was that she believed that Bernie Sanders was one of the founders of Israel. So you can actually see this is one of the funniest tweets I've ever seen. So this is from a forum, but in any case, so this, okay, I think I have it. So she's a BDS advocate, and I believe she's even, is this the same one? So she is blue checked, so she is Twitter verified, and she shared verifiable fake news, which is that here. Snake in the sand. Sanders takes a bad position on Julian Assange, refuses to say he's a journalist, opposes BDS, says he doesn't want Palestinians to have equal rights because that would be the end of Israel, was one of Israel's founders. Zero investment into this guy. So this was a tweet that she shared in January, and it was roundly mocked. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen, because she is basically saying that someone who I think was born only a couple years before Israel was founded, lived in the United States his entire life. She said that because he volunteered on a kibbutz and he lived in Israel for like a few months, and kibbutzes were part of Israel's foundation, that he was a founder of Israel. Basic non-linear thinking. So she commented on a post by a UAE person. I don't know who Hind FQ is, but she said, now after almost 80 years of a ban of visiting the Holy Aqsa Mosque, all Muslims of the UAE are allowed to go pray in Jerusalem. Can we stop fighting now and start living in peace? Now, I don't know why it would be 80 years, because until 1967, which was only 53 years ago, it was controlled by the Jordanians, and then before that by the British. So I don't see why it would have been a ban back in the 1940s when, not 80 years ago, that was 1940. So I don't know if this information is actually correct. So Syrian Girl posts in response, you think you can walk over the bodies of Palestinians to pray on their soil to Satan? I'd like to see you try and visit Al-Aqsa Mosque. You're even more banned now. Look, I don't know why she would say first of all, if it's a mosque that belongs to all Muslims, then it doesn't belong to the Palestinians in particular. Can't we accept that? So, semantic argument, but nevertheless, this is a video that made the rounds a long time ago. This was a Saudi blogger who would he went to Al-Aqsa, and this is the reaction he got from the children and bystanders. So they call them Ya'usah. Ya'usah in Arabic means you garbage. And they call them a lot of other epithets. So remember, she's posting this video. There's no evidence that he did anything to them. The only thing he's doing is he's visiting the mosque.
يلا يا رخيص يلا يا حيوان يا مطبع يا رخيص يا زباله روح طبع مع ال سعود تبعونا هاي وجهه المعرم يا زباله يا رخيص يا نزل ايوه هاي وجهه الهلس رخيص روح طبع مع اليهود سمعت بسلمان العميل ايوه هاي اطفال فلسطين كلهم بتف عليك يا مقرن.
So they're calling him all sorts of names. They're calling him a Jew.
خلي ترامب يحلبكوا خلي ترامب يحلبكوا جاي يصلي صلي برا يروح صلي عند اليهود على الكنيسه تروح صلي بيت الكنيسه برا.
They're telling him to go to a Jewish synagogue because the Beit HaKnesset is Hebrew for synagogue. Go to the synagogue, don't come here. They're calling him Zabala. That's another word for I think Usach means you filth and Zabala means you garbage. Calling him a dog. By the way, in the Arab world, being a dog, dogs are seen as an impure, disgusting animal. So calling somebody a dog is a huge insult.
ما حدا مدد عليه ما حدا مدد عليه يلا عشان بالاقصى روح صلي بالبيت الكنيسه تجيش تصلي هون عند اليهود روح صلي عند اليهود تبعونا صلي يلا يا زباله يا ملوكين برا الاقصى دائما بتطحي الزباين الاقصى دائما بتطحي الزباين ازيك يلا برا يا زباله والله نكون ضرر رخيصه فيك يا زباله ارخص من رخيص ولا.
They said something about his shoes being covered with garbage. So these are the Palestinians reacting, and this is what Syrian Girl says is a compelling answer to the approach of peace between the UAE and Israel. But the fact is that this is a Saudi blogger. He's not even from the Emirates, so she's conflating those two things. And there's most of the reaction is actually positive, and you see a lot of these people are basically mocking this reaction because the fact is that you have a lot of anger about this, but where is this motivation? There's people who are saying, oh, and Palestinians are banned to pray in their land. What a joke! No, this is untrue. That if they're banned from being prayed, then how is he at the mosque and they're there too, right? So basic logic and observation refute all of this notion that this is some sort of infringement on Palestinian rights. The reason that there is a lot of anger about what's going on is that many people refuse, despite many years of evidence, to see Israeli relations with any country in the context of anything besides their relations with the Palestinians. You have Abby Martin. She retweeted Israel is now bombing Gaza to celebrate the peace deal with the UAE. Eastern and northern areas are under heavy attacks from Israeli warplanes. That's from Omar Grayeb, who is he's a verified journalist, even though I don't know where he's. I don't remember ever reading him, but he's verified. But the fact is that the bombing. So if you see here, so a lot of it has to do with these incendiary balloons that have been going on for the past few days. So and rocket fires. So they only talk about the reaction from the Israelis, or there's always been, this is something that I think people should bear in mind. There's always been this dispute about who started what, whether the Israelis started it by winning the war, or the Palestinians started it by, you know, floating incendiary balloons into Israeli territory, causing wildfires, sometimes harming civilian areas. This is very important. They do not recognize any ability by Israel to have relations with other countries without resolving the Palestinian conflict. This is something a lot of people will say. Even so, I listened to a podcast by someone, earlier today, and it was ridiculous how people who call themselves anti-war literally can't celebrate any sort of peace treaty unless it's some sort of, they just want an outcome. They want that the outcome in their mind is the elimination of Israel as a Jewish country. And I'll tell you what, a lot, even some of my viewers, they don't like, I have some viewers who, whenever I cover a topic, which isn't every day, I cover a topic related to Israel, they'll put in the comments, they'll put Greater Israel and everything. I don't respond because usually it doesn't even have anything to do with what I was talking about. And I bet you the same user, she'll probably put in the comments this time Greater Israel, even though it has nothing to do. In fact, Israel actually said that they're going to, I guess, suspend plans to annex part of the West Bank. So technically, this is a step against Greater Israel, but they're still going to put Greater Israel in the comments because they don't have any further, they don't have any further explanation for how their point of view is implied. You have this person. This is a Turkey-based freelance journalist. He posted a cartoon of an Arab sheik basically tied up like a Jewish star. So then we have this. People are saying, Gaza tonight, we can thank the fucking UAE for emboldening the Zionist enemy, Arab slaves. This is a woman who is a senior associate at St. Antony's College at Oxford University. Look, there's been war between Israel and the Palestinians for many, many, many years. This is a cartoon I saw yesterday. It shows this is actually technically a racist cartoon, racist against Arabs, because it shows an Arab sheik over here, he's in the shape of a knife handle that's clasping the hand of a Jewish knife blade in the back of the Palestinians. So the fact is that people are extremely butthurt over here's an even better one, over the fact that these two countries are, signing a peace treaty, even though there actually was never any, there were only formal hostilities between Israel and the UAE. The United Arab Emirates never participated in any of the wars between the Arab countries and Israel because they never really had a strategic interest in them, and they also are not really that big of a country. So it's almost as if nothing changes, and many will probably admit that nothing actually changes. So and then they're portraying the UAE as Trump's dog jumping through a Star of David hoop. That's the way that they look at the world. So these are people who are posting end times visions for the Mahdi, the Islamic savior. Is this actually Iran? No. So Turkey threatens to suspend UAE ties over it. So that's another country that's not happy. Turkey, which already is like, it's involved in blatant intervention in Libya. It's a country that has been intervening in Syria and Iraq. It's a country that has been dick wagging against Greece recently. they're pissed off about the UAE signing a peace treaty with Israel. Those are the types of people who are pissed off about it. Lebanon's president Michel Aoun expressed willingness to consider peace talks with Israel. So this would be insane if Lebanon did this, which I don't think it'll actually happen. Um, so they're saying that this might happen. I don't think it will. Even I think I can make some. I can temper expectations. You have this. People are saying the UAE is a disgrace to the Islamic world. Peace with the occupying regime in Jerusalem is a sign of the lack of honor and zeal of the rulers of this country. Shame on you. This is something I saw yesterday. Our conscience is strong enough to condemn such political game, and this is for these passports. I don't know which country's passport this is. I don't think it's Jordan, but I do know that this reminds me of the Jordanian passport. But it says this passport is valid for all countries of the world except Israel. So there's countries that say, well, if you as one of our citizens travels over there, you're going to be banned from traveling here. So yeah, that's something that I think is going to be a big issue. Um, Now apparently there's going to be some sort of um, censorship within the UAE against anti-Semitism there. Now, look, I don't support anti-Semitism, but I do think it's like, what are you supposed to do? So you're supposed to throw people in prison for opposing this peace treaty? Even dumb opinions, I think, should be permitted. If you keep them within the realm of opinion, it doesn't harm anyone. If you keep it within the realm of thoughts and free speech, I think it's fine. I don't think obviously if there's people who are committing acts of violence against the UAE's leadership, and I think that's a totally different matter. But I don't know if this is in English or not. Here.
السلام عليكم. هل تعلم أنه أصبح بإمكانك أن تساهم كعنصر فعال في الحماية والحفاظ على مجتمع دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة من خلال تطبيق إلكتروني؟ تطبيق مجتمعي آمن. التطبيق الإلكتروني التابع لمكتب النائب العام الاتحادي يمكنك من الإبلاغ عن الجرائم الإلكترونية والنشاطات التي تروج للأفكار أو العقائد التي تهدد أمن المجتمع أو المبادئ الأساسية التي يقوم عليها. إنه سهل الاستخدام. بعد تحميل التطبيق واختيار اللغة المفضلة، أدخل رقم هاتفك وستصلك رسالة برقم التأكيد. أدخل الرقم ثم ابدأ بمشاركة.
So it does say that it is against things like promoting anti-Semitism. I don't think you should necessarily have to, even if you have like retarded ideas, you shouldn't have to be censored by this. This person says the UAE diplomatic efforts succeed in disrupting the Israeli project aiming at annexing the lands of the West Bank, give new hopes to the Palestinians to establish a state. What do you think? Joke of the day. So, if so, I don't want to laugh alone. So this guy's kind of, he's laughing at this pretext, which was that, we're not going to annex the West Bank. Therefore, there's going to be a peace treaty. And I have to agree. It's not exactly the biggest trade. Israel lost nothing. The UAE didn't really gain much apart from having a new trading partner. Luxembourg's foreign minister lambasted the UAE for its recent deal to normalize relations with Israel, accusing it of selling out the Palestinian cause. Let me see. I need to check that out. That's pretty. Like, what? Who cares what Luxembourg says? Okay, so this is from Anadolu Agency, which is a Turkish website. It says Luxembourg, UAE selling out Palestine with the Israel deal. No Middle East peace possible until resolution of Israel-Palestine conflict, says Luxembourg's top diplomat. But exactly who cares what Luxembourg says? Luxembourg's foreign minister on Friday lambasted the UAE for its recent deal to normalize relations with Israel, accusing it of selling out the Palestinian cause. I also know, because I have many contacts in this region, that there is a fear of Iran, but I think you can't just let your own brothers down in order to pursue economic interests and perhaps also have more security for yourself. Well, I mean, Luxembourg is in very shallow waters there because they're basically a tax haven. So, as far as I remember, it was either Luxembourg or Liechtenstein. I need to look this guy up. So his name is Jean Asselborn. So let me just look at the Wikipedia machine. So he's from the Socialist Workers Party but this is something that I always find ironic, that you have people who are flaming leftists who hate the Israelis and support the Palestinian cause, yet it's the Jews who are being considered this leftist rot within society, and the Israelis as part of it. Even though if you look at the leadership of the Israeli government nowadays, it's about as not leftist as you can get, as opposed to maybe 30, 40 years ago. So once again, you're just seeing like the same crap always coming up. What other reactions do we have? I don't really see that much. Some people are kind of, this is Popular Front of India says a relationship is unethical, betrayal of Palestinians. So this is a Popular Front of India chairman, OMA Salam, has condemned the latest normalization of ties between. So yeah, there's a lot of belly aching over this. Let me give you my analysis. I know we're already 20 minutes in, but I did want to do a little talk about this first. So we're gonna color in Israel in blue. It's gonna be color time today, and we're gonna put the Palestinians in this light green over here. So those are the two countries that are in question. Now, the countries that already had, um, relationships with Israel, I'm gonna label in this like pinkish orange color. So that would be Jordan and Jordan and Egypt. So you already had these two countries. This was in 1979. Egypt established relations with Israel. And in 1994, Jordan did. And it wasn't some sort of alliance. They just simply recognized them, and they have the ability to have commercial and trade ties. And in fact, for many, many years, the ties between Israel and Egypt have always been pretty cold. It's almost as it's like a non-aggression pact more than a peace treaty. Recently, with the new president Al-Sisi, it's been a little bit more warm. Now, of course, Israel's harshest opponent nowadays is, we're going to put them in, let's say, purple. You have Iran, and then you also have Turkey. So these are two countries. Now, Turkey, technically they have relations with Israel, but it's not good relations. They have formal diplomatic relations. Iran and Israel have no diplomatic relations. So is it feeling complicated yet? And then there's the other countries of the region which have always been intransigent enemies of Israel. So what people have to understand is in 1979, when Egypt made peace with Israel as part of the Camp David Accords, this was earth-shattering for the region. And as a reaction, instead of countries deciding to join them, there was largely this retrenchment, and this was mainly among countries that were Eastern Bloc supporters, or Eastern Bloc countries that were supported by the Soviet Union. Not all of them are on this map because this is only of the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. It doesn't include North Africa, but you have Iraq and Syria. They were the foremost among them, and so was Yemen. Now, besides them, I think you would include Libya and Algeria as members of the rejectionist front. They were the hard left on in the Arab League. They were the countries that were the closest allies of the Soviet Union. And later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, you had basically Yemen Yemen went back to being just sort of, it wasn't, it didn't have like a good relationship with Israel, but it was no longer a hardline country. Then you also have a third block of countries, which is largely, you know, largely headed by Saudi Arabia. These are the conservative Arab principalities. Okay, that would include Saudi Arabia, obviously. Kuwait, I think you could include in there. Bahrain, the UAE, and Oman. And Oman is a very, very backward country. Doesn't have much wealth. It's not an oil principality like the other ones. It just doesn't have much. Hasn't really been involved in many of the complications in the region. And one of the things people don't know about Oman, because nobody ever talks about it, because there's not much going on with it, is that Oman is actually populated by people who belong to a third sect of Islam that's not Sunni or Shia. It's called the Ibadi Muslims. So they don't really have a dog in the fight between the Shiites and the Sunnis. They probably would not like the Shiites because they don't want Iranian domination. Now, as far as the last principality here, Qatar, they're more closely aligned to Turkey. So you have these two countries. They are Muslim Brotherhood supporting countries, Qatar and Turkey. Briefly, in 2012, Egypt was among them too, but then there was a military coup and they went back to being more or less a U.S. ally. So this is, broadly speaking, the region as it is today. I think there's one more country we need to fill in, which is, um, they're Lebanon. Lebanon is largely dominated by Syria strategically and diplomatically. Cyprus doesn't really come into play here as much, so you can ignore them. And then you have this war that's going on with Yemen. So this is the way that the region looked up until recently. But with this, um, with this new peace treaty, you now have another country that has a peace treaty with Israel, and there is talk of very soon being, Oman and Bahrain having peace treaties with Israel. Um, there's this is from the CBC, so there's talk of it. I don't know if it's going to happen. Maybe it's just talk. We don't know what's going to happen, but now with the UAE deal in place, some experts predict Bahrain and Oman could be next to forge agreements of their own. Countries are very influenced by their neighbors, especially their neighbor who are seen to be in relatively similar situations, said William F. Wexler, senior advisor for Middle East programs at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. And the Atlantic Council, if you are not aware, is actually not necessarily the most pro-Trump group. They're more one of these neoliberal, neocon organizations. But if they're saying that this could happen, it could happen, because they would be, it would mean that this is something that is increasingly likely across the board, not even depending on what part of the political spectrum you're on. In the case of Oman, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Oman's Sultan Qaboos bin Said in a very public meeting that was broadcast across the country in 2018. Well, following Qaboos' death earlier this year, and with a relatively new sultan having just assumed power, a deal with Israel may have to wait, Wexler said. That means Bahrain, which congratulated the UAE for taking steps to enhance the chances for Middle East peace, could be next in line. Although the kingdom would want to see the final details of the deal and engage domestic reaction, Wexler said he could imagine Bahrain moving relatively quickly. I don't think that. So they then go on to say that it's not likely that Saudi Arabia will fall in line, or join the queue, whatever way you want to put it. I think opponents of Israel would say, oh, they're falling in line because they're afraid of the U.S. and they're afraid of Iran. Just take it however you want to mean it. Some people would say, "Oh, you're drawing a Greater Israel map." Yeah, whatever, asshole. But yeah, here you go. So Oman and Bahrain could end up being the third and the second and third legs on this chair, and that would be bad news for Qatar because I don't think Qatar would be happy with three different countries that have diplomatic ties with Israel right on its doorstep. I have no idea what's going to happen with Kuwait. Let's see if it even mentions Kuwait in this article. No. So I think personally, this is just my gut feeling. I don't think Kuwait would be able to do it because they have a very large Palestinian population made up of people that migrated there in I think 1948. I believe even Arafat, Yasser Arafat, the founder of the Fatah party, which is the ruling party in the Palestinian Authority. I believe he even lived in Kuwait for many, many years, and he was actually an engineer for a while there. So I don't anticipate it happening with Kuwait. Now, what does this mean on the whole for the region? Look, let me just clear some of this. So you have, let's just show some of these states that are still. So the states right now that have relations with Israel, they enjoy trade relations with them. But you have to realize that while Jordan is a relatively stable and somewhat modern state, it doesn't have necessarily a thriving economy. It's sort of mired in poverty. It's not it doesn't have it's not rich in natural resources. It's not strategically located. It just isn't a very big magnet for investment for a variety of reasons. It doesn't have nearly as much coastline as either Israel or Egypt. Now Egypt, I think, has been held back for many, many years. I think economically it could become a superpower, and it already does have some significant industry. But the UAE, being a country that is, first of all, it does have oil wealth. It also now has a lot of trading wealth because Dubai has become a center for international business. So it does change the game. And I think that some of the countries that are approaching this mindset, especially Bahrain, could deeply benefit from this. And you could see this regional bloc become something of a very strong competitor to Iran because Iran's economy has been cratering. Let's see if we can get a report. Um, so, the sanctions have hit it pretty hard. I just don't want to get something too biased because I see some of these are like anti-Iran websites. This is from Arab News. Now, I think Arab News, is from the Emirates, but here's what they're saying. China, the biggest winner as Iran's economy collapses. This is from, well, it's not even dated, but it says the maximum pressure policy and sanctions imposed on Iran by the Trump administration have definitely achieved one of their main objectives, exerting significant economic pressure on the Iranian regime. Nevertheless, one of the unintended consequences is that Iran is now being pushed into the arms of China, and China is taking full advantage of U.S.-Iranian tensions. Now, I don't know why this is seen as a drawback, but if Iran becomes dominated by China, its power in its own right becomes diminished. Okay, if they're dependent on one country for all of their petroleum exports, it's not good news for Iran. So I think that's about it for today. You see a lot of the opposition is very much couched in this ideological hatred of Israel. And people just have to understand that yes, countries do often make selfish decisions that are based on self-interest, just like people. The people who run the UAE, the people of the UAE, they're not obligated to serve some cause that international leftists and some of the Muslim world and Arab world engage in. There is not as much of a draw toward supporting this long-standing war to liberate Palestine from the Israelis as there used to be. So, with that in mind, I know you can hear me yawning. I would have done this earlier, but my computer was updating, so I went to the gym. But I want you guys to sort of put your feelings. Like I know there's going to be a couple people who'll put, "Oh, Greater Israel" in the comments. So after you put Greater Israel in the comments, please like, share, and subscribe, and put your other comments. What do you think the effect of this deal will be on the region? What do you think it will be on, the world economy? Does this benefit the United States? Does this mean perhaps, I think if people ask what's going to happen with Russia in the Middle East. Are they going to be as invested in Syria? I think if enough countries start to open up with Israel, I think you could see Russia sort of look at the region as less of some sort of playground for some of their things. But yeah, I think that this is positive. Even if you are an opponent of American intervention, I am an opponent as well. I don't think that you can look at this in a negative light the way that many of these so-called anti-war people are behaving. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also, subscribe to me on all this other social media that you see behind me. YouTube, BitChute, Minds.com, Subscribestar, Gab, and Library. And you can also find me on Parler, and I'll talk to you later.